we have the ability to look at our students as the individual. Strip away the average, don't worry about the average, and say, okay, this individual student, whether they're a 1, a 4, a 5, whatever they are, let me target and educate and develop an educational plan for this student individually. We are more about an individualized education rather than an industrialized education with them. So when somebody confronts you about homeschooling, feel free to say, as a parent, what I'm providing is an individualized education. I tailor my education to the needs of the student. That's what I would expect with education. Is it's not just, we're not just choosing one tool. We're always looking at the student, adapting it as part of an individualized plan. One of the books that I would recommend, especially for elementary age students, The Work of Your Hand, Fingerprints, God and You. Fantastic week so far. Wow, what a week it's been, huh? Hey, so today I am running solo, but an important topic, I think, especially in understanding master books and understanding how we think educationally, part of our educational philosophy. And so, and I talked about in the past a little bit that one of the things that I would like to do is maybe if there's a book that I read that was helpful in developing kind of the philosophy, or something that's helpful in parenting or whatnot, that I would share that. So today, one of the books that I'm going to kind of talk about, I'm not necessarily making a recommendation to go out and purchase this book, but if the topic is interesting, the book itself may be interesting, or you may be interested in looking at a TED Talk by the author or whatnot. The book that I'm talking about is The End of Average. It was written by Todd Rose, How We Succeed in a World That Values Sameness. Came across this book, I don't know, a year or two ago, and it did a fantastic job of summarizing what it is that we as a company, kind of the educational philosophy that we have. And when we're talking about the average, education is based on averages. And this book actually, while it's talking about a lot of things, it does incorporate a lot with conversations regarding academics. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But we're brought up thinking that this is average. If you know, this is what an average man at my age should be: weight, height, all of these things that we would say this is what average is, and we sometimes put that pressure on ourselves that because we're not average, because we're less than average, we feel bad about that. Well, the book does a fantastic job of explaining a couple of things. One that it does is talks about in the military, in the age when they went from pilot-propelled or propeller-driven airplanes to jet propulsion. One of the things that was happening was a lot of the pilots were actually ejecting or crashing, and they were trying to find a solution. And they had made a cockpit that was for the average pilot. And so based on the average dimensions, you know, this is what average is. Well, one gentleman figured out that if they customized the cockpit to fit the pilot, the success went up significantly. And let's see, coming in late, the name of the book is The End of Average, Todd Rose, How We Succeed in the World That Values Sameness, Vicki. And again, I'm not necessarily recommending that you go out and purchase the book. It's a book that has had influence on my philosophy. And so I'm just kind of sharing a book summary, if you will, and talking a little bit about that. But if it's something that really interests you, Todd has a talk on, he has a TED Talk. He also has a Google Talk that's really good, that you can find online as well and get some additional insights. And why does this matter to us as homeschoolers? Well, I think a couple reasons. We're always in a position where we're defending ourselves, either to family members or community leaders or other peers that we have. And I think that it's important for us to be able to define our educational philosophy, what makes us distinct from other educational systems and why there's value in it. And so, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So these fighter pilots, once they changed the cockpit to fit the pilots and they gave a little more customization, they found that there was success. Now, it would have been easy to have blamed the skill of the pilots, to blame the training, and not look at the fact that there were conditions, right? There's other studies of, I think the American Gynecological Society, or I think that's who it was, compiled all these statistics of the ideal woman, like what are all these figures, and they took all these conditions and then they made statues of the average woman. This is her body type. And that statue, I guess, went and toured and people got to see this is what the average woman, if you take all women, all their body sizes, put it together, this is what you have. So then somebody got the bright idea, hey, let's have a contest and see, can we find a woman who matches average? So you have all these women submitting their measurements to win and become normal was the name of the average woman. That was the name of the statue. So can we find a woman who looks and has the exact measurements of the average woman? The woman who won only had 3 of the measurements. With all the measurements that they took, only 3 was the most they could get. There was nobody that matched average. Body types went everywhere. And if you don't know, like how we calculate average, right? If I take the number, let's say I'm calculating standards for 3rd grade. So I take your 8 and 9-year-olds, your typical 8 and 9-year-olds, I test them for skills. One test kind of at a 1, late bloomer, one test at a 4, one test advanced at a 5. If I take those, divide it by 3, I get 3.33. So I can say this is what an average 3rd grader should have. Like these are the standards for an average 3rd grader. But what about the one who placed at a 1 or a 5? They're nowhere near average. They're the outliers and the extremes, and they end up getting left out. There was another, in one of the talks that he does, there's a study about self-control, and they use these little kids like toddlers, they put them in a room, they'll put a marshmallow on the plate, and then they'll come and say, we'll be back or whatnot. Well, he said one of the things that happened was somebody did an expansive study in a shelter that's run for women and children, and they thought for sure these kids won't have self-control. Like they'll for sure grab the marshmallows and run because they're used to not having food and that type of thing. So she did this study, brought the kids in, and the amazing thing of the study that she did was when the biggest difference, if the person who came in, put the marshmallow on a plate, left it in the room, said to the kid, I think the condition was, she said, there's going to be art supplies. Like we got some art supplies we're going to give you and stuff like that. And they did that before they did the marshmallow study. I might be a little off, but I'm close. And so then they would go away, come back, and the adult would give them the art kit. Or the adult would say, I'm sorry, we didn't have supplies. I'm sorry, we don't have it, so I'm not going to be able to give it to you. And then they would do the condition of, here's a marshmallow, please don't eat it. When I come back, I'll give you more. To the group that the person had kept their word, the majority of them waited the full 15 minutes. They had no problem. To the group where they said that they were promised that they were going to come back and give them a marshmallow, and then they didn't, that group broke almost within a minute. They had the amount of self-control they had was conditioned upon the dependability of the person who is making the promise, which I think is pretty profound for us as parents. That do we honor our word, and can our kids rely on that? It would have some kind of impact on their ability to self-control and self-manage. So sometimes we say these are the averages, but we don't necessarily look at the outliers or the conditions. And if a condition changes, there's all these variables. Averages aren't necessarily evil. They give us indications of, percentiles and averages help us. But we have to, as homeschool educators, think a little bit differently. And I think that's where we have the ability to look at our students as the individual. Strip away the average, don't worry about the average, and say, okay, this individual student, whether they're a 1, a 4, a 5, whatever they are, let me target and educate and develop an educational plan for this student individually. Because what happens is we're used to a public education system which is very industrialized. So I'm going to read you story time with Randy. I see a lot of you commenting. It's good to see you. Okay, so in college, my major was business and marketing, and one of the things that we would study was scientific management, the science of scientific management, and one of the leading founders of this kind of systematic movement was Frederick Taylor. And so that in the turn of the industrial age, when we were trying to figure out how to have good factory workers and not necessarily good business owners or poets or whatever, he began creating, systems of management and how you would run a factory, and the systems managed pretty much everything. Well, that began to spill over into the education system. And so I'm just going to read something. It's in the chapter talking about that. But the educational Taylorist declared that the new mission of education should be to prepare mass numbers of students to work in a newly Taylorized economy. Following Taylor's maxim that a system of average workers was more efficient than a system of geniuses, educational Taylorists argued that schools should provide a standard education for an average student instead of trying to foster greatness. By example, John D. Rockefeller funded an organization known as the General Education Board when published in 1912 in a 1912 essay describing its Taylorist vision of schools. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or of science. We are not to raise them up to be authors, orators, poets, or men of letters. We shall not teach them or search for embryo great artists, painters, musicians, nor lawyers or doctors, preachers, politicians, statesmen, of whomever we have ample supply. The task we set before ourselves is very simple as well as very beautiful. We will organize our children into little communities and teach them to do in a perfect way the things that their fathers and mothers are doing in an imperfect way. To organize and teach children to become workers who could perform industrial tasks in a perfect way. The Taylorists set out to remake the architecture of the entire educational system to conform to the central tenet of scientific management. Standardize everything around the average. Schools around the country adopted the Gary Plan, named after the industrialized Indiana city where it originated. Students were divided into groups by age, not by performance, interest, or aptitude. And these groups of students rotated through different classes, each lasting a standardized period of time. School bells were introduced to emulate factory bells in order to mentally prepare children for their future careers. The Taylorist education reformers also introduced a new professional role into education, the curriculum planner. Modeled after scientific management, these planners created a fixed, inviolable curriculum that dictated everything that happened in school, including what and how students were taught, what textbooks should contain, and how students were graded. A standardization spread through schools nationwide. School boards rapidly adopted a top-down hierarchical management that replicated the management structure of Taylorism, assigning executive planning roles to principals, superintendents, and district superintendents. And so you get to see, like, okay, I get this school system was designed to teach students to be to be good industrial factory workers, right? And then he goes on to explain how people came after them and refined it so that you had a system of the high performers would go into higher levels in the factories, and lower performing students would either be cast out or into more of the mindless type activities in a factory. So So we have this industrialized education system that the American education system is still very much modeled after. And when you take a standardized test, what are you looking at? You're looking at how well does my children compare to the average, not necessarily all the conditions that go into that, because there's a lot of them. It's just, I have a 14-year-old, they tested, this is how my 14-year-old compares to every other 14-year-old. And so we have an education system that's built on that. Well, as curriculum companies, one of the temptations is to build curriculum that models what everybody's used to. If you went to an industrialized education, a public school that was built on that formula, you're looking at curriculums that is familiar to what you relate to school being. And I think even a lot of the Christian curriculums, right, the goal wasn't necessarily academics, even though that was important, or it was academical excellence. It still modeled itself highly after averages. One of the things with master books that typically tends to trip people up a little bit is when we will tell people, don't worry so much about the number on the book. I know it says 1, 2, 3, 4, and yes, it does match the standards for first grade, second grade, third grade, but look at them more as skills. So we're looking at, if you're in third grade and you have somebody who's still developing and coming on, don't be afraid to go to book 2 or to book 1. Look at it from a skill. You know, it's like, I don't play golf, but we're getting into frisbee golf, disc golf. And in one disc, I was surprised the first time that happened that I was going to just grab a frisbee and start tossing it down to the whatever it's called. And my son's like, no, that's wrong. That's a putter. You need to choose the right tool, the right frisbee to get it down the course. It's heavier and flies longer. And so that's how it is in education. We don't just have an average. With master books education, we have a lot of skill-based series. We also are very eclectic in that we have multiple solutions, because one solution, the Charlotte Mason approach, may resonate with one family, and a more traditional approach resonates with another family. So when we have the availability of multiple solutions, we do. Now it makes it difficult because people are used to more of the industrialized model, where I say I have a third grader, these are the standards of a third grade, I match this up, I'm good. I would like the culture, especially the master books culture, to be built more on, no, we are more about an individualized education rather than an industrialized education. I don't really care what every other third grader, what the average of third graders is. What I care about is what my third grader, where are they? How can I help them succeed? How can I build on their strengths? How can I teach them how to work with their handicaps and their weaknesses and strengthen those areas, but tailor the education to be with them. So when somebody confronts you about homeschooling, feel free to say, as a parent, what I'm providing is an individualized education. I tailor my education to the needs of the student. The teacher-student ratio in my classroom is 1-to-1. The teacher ratio in a public school classroom is 1 teacher to 25 to 30 students. Maybe they have a couple of aides in the class, but that's an industrialized type education, and the student-to-teacher ratio is so high, the teacher can't possibly tailor the education to meet the needs of the students. Even if they're close to average, there's going to be other conditions that apply, right? Like the marshmallow story. Based on the student, their experience, their work, their diets, the teacher's personality, the school district, so many factors go into this. So as an educator, you as a homeschool educator have this immense advantage because it's 1-to-1. Now you have students in other grades that you're working with. You know, at one time we were 1-to-8 or 1-to-7 with all of the kids that we had in school. And so Kristen had multiple students she was working with, but from the student standpoint, she wasn't trying to fit the third grade lesson plan to meet the needs of everybody. She could focus on that individual student, choose the courses choose the levels and the approach based on that student. So I think what I really enjoyed about this book was it reinforced who we are as a company in saying not every student is going to fit into a third grade curriculum. And we would rather say, take the readiness test, place your student. Even if a student goes back a grade and works forward, think of it more along the line of that disc golf or frisbee golf, where you're choosing the right tool to move down the course, if you will. And if that means going back a grade or two, letting the child gain confidence, let them develop again the love of learning and having a win, and getting it down the ways, so that then you can choose the next tool to get it further down, and then you can choose the next tool. There's I think there's in a professional kit or something, there's 5 frisbees. You guys probably know more about frisbee golf than I do. But the basic kit has 3 tools that you choose from, and it's all based on light and the distance that you have and how you use it with wind and da-da-da-da-da. That's how curriculum should work. It's not one solution gets us the entire way. It's multiple tools that help us get there. And the cool thing about the frisbee golf is, right, you walk up to the course and it says the next goal is 150 feet away. It's par 3. That means you should be able to do it with 3 tosses. So that's what I would expect with education. We're not just choosing one tool. We're always looking at the student, adapting it as part of an individualized plan. And as home educators, that's the advantage we have. We are targeting and individualizing the education. We're rejecting the industrialized education that says, my student needs to fit into these molds, which doesn't exist. And that's where I really enjoyed the story. I think the one I really enjoyed the most was the one about all these women trying to be the average woman who nobody did. Nobody could be. There was no such thing as the average woman. and that fits so well, excuse me, into, I'm so sorry. Into our children. Anytime someone coughs around here, everybody's ready to throw on hazmat suits and take them out of the building. So, so hopefully that provided a little bit of value and insight. And again, the book that I'm talking about that I read from is The End of Average: How We Succeed in a World That Values Sameness. This is not a Master Books book. This is not a Christian book. This would fit more into probably a business book, or I don't know what the classification, but psychology. It's a psychology book, and so that would provide some value. If you would enjoy teaching your child that they are unique, fearfully and wonderfully made by God. Scripture says He knew them before the foundations of the world were laid. That He knew who they were. That's just amazing to me. That before He even spoke, any of creation into existence, that He knew all of us, and that He had His hand in forming us and fashioning us. One of the books that I would recommend, especially for elementary age students, The Work of Your Hands, Fingerprints, God and You, written by Jennifer Hall Rivera. She is her education, I think, is in criminology, she does forensic science. And there is just a lot of neat things in this book about the uniqueness of fingerprints. Then there's some art things that you can do with a stamp pad. I've seen where people are grabbing this and they put them in their Easter basket or the Resurrection Sunday basket type thing, and give it as a gift like that. I think it would make a great, just kind of a, here's the deal about knowing that God actually cares about me. I'm not unseen today. He knows me. He gave me a unique set of fingerprints. That's how much He cared about us. How easy would it have been to say, we don't really care about that. He gave us unique identifiers. And then as we study the genetic codes, wow. And there's going to be so much. Our genetic fingerprints are amazing. And what they're learning about DNA and turning things on and off. And it's not just the diets we eat, but it can also be the people we hang around. Certain factors can actually activate and deactivate. Like God is so, he personalized us so much. And there's such value in that. And I'm called his child because I've accepted Christ and adopted into his family. So he doesn't neglect me. He holds me. And I think that there's value to learning that our individuality is because God sees us individually as well. All right. Well, because I'm alone and there's comments coming from both the app and Facebook, what I'll do is I'll be sure to watch the comments, and if there's any questions or anything, I'll be sure to comment. Hopefully this was helpful. If it was helpful, please let me know. If you enjoyed being exposed, so to speak, to a book that's would provide some value, and hopefully it helps you understand a little bit more about why Master Books goes with the approach of let's not try to cookie cutter our children. Let's educate the individual. All right, you guys, we are praying for you. We know the challenges that families are facing right now. We appreciate your prayers as well. Everybody is working at present, and we are working to get orders out, and inventory is good. So as of today, everything is as as it needs to be. All right, guys. Hey, God bless. Have a good weekend. We'll talk to you later.